There is a single piece of stone in southern Egypt that is longer than a passenger jet and heavier than a naval warship. It was cut out of a mountain by hand, and it is still lying there, on its side, in the open air, exactly where the workers set down their tools and walked away. You can drive to it today. You can stand next to it and run your hand along it. It rests in a shallow pit of pink granite shaped on 3 sides. Its underside still fused to the bedrock it was being freed from. Near the end of the work, a crack opened along its length, and in a single moment, the largest object ever carved in the ancient world became useless. So they left it. And that act of walking away froze something in place that no finished monument ever could. Because carved into the granite all around this giant are the marks of whatever shaped it. Long, straight channels, a trench barely wide enough for a person. Fields of shallow craters where something pulverized the hardest common rock on Earth into powder. The marks are still crisp. You can photograph them. And here is the detail that should stop you cold. We have the stone, we have the marks, we have the entire workshop preserved like a room where the clock stopped. We do not have the tools. Not one. In over a century of excavation, no one has ever recovered the machine that did this to granite. For a long time, the textbooks told us the answer was simple. Copper chisels, stone hammers, ropes, sand, and time. A patient people scratching at rock for generations. That is the story on the plaques. That is the story the guides repeat as the buses roll past. But the closer modern engineers look at what was actually done to this stone, the more that tidy story falls apart. Today, we are going to walk through exactly how the ancient Egyptians took mountains apart to build the pyramids, what the marks in the granite really reveal, and why the one question that matters most, where the tools went, has never been answered. Stay with me, because the part everyone argues about is not the part that should unsettle you. Most people who go to Egypt never see this place. They ride out to the pyramids, they photograph the outside, they ride a camel, they leave. The quarry sits hundreds of miles to the south, in a city called Aswan, and it looks like nothing. A rough field of pink rock, fenced off, baking in the sun. Most people walk right past the real mystery without ever knowing it is there. Because the thing that should terrify you is not the pyramids themselves. It is the marks left behind by the people who cut the stone for them. And those marks are here, in the dirt, where almost nobody looks. The stone in the pit is called the Unfinished Obelisk. Had it been raised, it would have stood about 42 meters tall, roughly the height of a 13-story building, and it would have weighed somewhere between 1,100 and 1,200 tons. A single piece, not a stack of blocks. One continuous shaft of solid granite, longer and heavier than anything the ancient world ever managed to stand upright. And it was being carved directly out of the living rock of the mountain, freed on all sides so it could be lifted out whole. Now hold that image, because the material matters more than the size. This is not soft limestone. Granite is one of the hardest stones on the planet, and Aswan granite is packed with quartz, a mineral that sits near the top of the hardness scale. Copper, the only metal the Egyptians had in quantity, is soft. You can scratch a copper blade with a piece of window glass. A copper chisel dragged across granite does almost nothing to the granite and quite a lot to the chisel. And yet, here is a 1,000-ton monument shaped out of that exact stone, with tool marks so clean you can still read them 4,000 years later. The mainstream position is not that this is easy to explain. The mainstream position, stated plainly by the people who have studied it their whole lives, is that we still argue about how it was done. And this quarry is not a side story. This is the source. The granite that lines the king's chamber deep inside the Great Pyramid, the granite of the Great Sealed Coffers, and the temple blocks at Giza, came from this exact ground, hauled 500 miles down the Nile. The Unfinished Obelisk is a later project carved centuries after the pyramids rose, but it was carved in the same quarry from the same pink granite, using the same tools and the same methods that had already been used to build the pyramids 1,000 years before. It is the clearest surviving snapshot we have of the technology that split mountains for the pharaohs. A workshop caught in the act. And it raises more questions than it answers. Before we get to those questions, look at what the Egyptians themselves called this object, because the word hides the whole problem in plain sight. Their name for an obelisk was Tekhenu. To them, it was sacred, a shaft of sunlight turned solid, a petrified ray of the sun god driven into the earth. For generations, museum placards and scholars have read the obelisk exactly that way, as pure religious symbolism, a devotional monument, an ornament of sun worship, and nothing more. But strip the theology away and read the word as a description of an object, a single ray of the sun, rendered in the hardest stone available and stood on end. That is not a poem. That is a specification. Petrified sunlight is a description of a manufacturing task. Take a mountain of granite, extract one flawless piece longer than any tree that grows. Shape it to a needle to within a hair. Free it whole without cracking it, and raise it upright against its own crushing weight. The sacred language has been read for centuries as decoration. Read it instead as an engineering brief, and the obelisk stops being a prayer and becomes a problem handed to a workforce. The mystery was never the meaning. The mystery was always the method, and the method is written into the marks on the stone. Here is the first one. Look at the trench around the obelisk. It runs the full length of the shaft, cut down into solid granite, and it is only about 75 centimeters wide. Just enough room for a single worker to crouch and swing. Someone stood in that gap and cut a channel through granite deep enough to undercut 1,000-ton block. With what? That is clue number one, and it is the most visual thing in this entire story. Hold on to it, because once you understand what left those marks, the second clue becomes impossible to explain away. Now let's talk about the tools we did find, because the ground here is littered with them, and they only deepen the problem. All across the Aswan quarry and around the base of the obelisk itself, archaeologists have recovered thousands of stone balls. Not copper, not bronze, balls of a dark, dense volcanic rock called dolerite, which is tougher than the granite it was used against. One study cataloged 1,419 of them from this quarry alone, averaging about 14 centimeters across, some weighing as much as 6 kilograms. And when researchers examined how they were worn, they realized something strange. These balls could not have been held while striking. The impact would shatter a worker's wrists. The only way to use them without injury was to throw them, releasing at the bottom of a downward swing and catching them on the rebound. Picture that. To shape a monument the size of a building, teams of workers stood over the granite and hurled 6-kilogram stones at it, hour after hour, day after day, pounding the rock into dust, one impact at a time. That is the official method for the rough work. Pounding with dolerite. And the astonishing thing is, it works. It is slow, it is brutal, but throw enough stone balls at granite for enough years, and you will eventually beat a trench into it. For decades, that was the settled answer. And for the rough shaping of the obelisk, it holds up. But then researchers tried to measure exactly how fast it goes, and the numbers opened a crack in the story. In a careful, modern experiment, right beside the obelisk, using an authentic dolerite pounder on a block of the same granite, a team measured the rate, 85 hits per minute, and the volume of granite removed came out to about 216 cc per hour. That is a coffee cup of rock dust an hour, from a full-grown adult swinging as fast as a human can. Their own conclusion was blunt. The results, they wrote, argue against pounding being the only method used. The trenches, the shafts, the undercutting beneath a 1,000-ton block cannot be explained by stone balls alone. Something else was in that quarry. And the deeper problem is this. Even where they can prove the method, they cannot prove the speed. They cannot make the timeline work. The mainstream answer explains the marks and then quietly runs out of time on the calendar. But the rough pounding is only the beginning, because the Egyptians did not just batter granite into shape. They cut it. They drilled it. They sliced through it with something that left grooves as clean as a modern workshop. And that is where this stops being a story about patience and starts being a story about a missing machine. Here is where it gets strange. More than a century ago, a British surveyor arrived at Giza and did something no one had bothered to do properly before. He measured everything, not admired it. Measured it to fractions of a millimeter with the instruments of a precision engineer. His name was Flinders Petrie, and he is not a fringe figure. He is the man often called the father of modern Egyptology. He wrote the foundational survey of the pyramids in 1883, and he was famous for being careful to the point of obsession. Petrie went in expecting to confirm the primitive tools story. He came out disturbed by what the stone was telling him. Petrie found the leftovers of a cutting process scattered across the site. Not just chisel marks. Saw cuts. Long, straight slots driven through blocks of granite and basalt, some of them meters long. And drill holes. Not chipped, not gouged, but bored. Clean, cylindrical holes punched straight down into the hardest stone, with the waste cores sometimes still lying nearby. Along the eastern edge of the Great Pyramid, there is a black platform of basalt paving, and if you walk up to its side, you can still see the parallel grooves where saws cut through it. Petrie documented those saw marks in 1883. They are, without dispute, ancient, and basalt, like granite, laughs at copper. Then there was the core. Petrie recovered a small cylinder of granite that had been drilled out of a larger piece, a waste core left behind when a tubular drill bored into the rock. Today, it is known as core number 7, and it became one of the most argued over objects in the history of Egyptology, because wrapped around that core was a spiral groove, a continuous helical line cut into the granite by whatever bit had gone down into it. And when Petrie measured the spacing of that groove, he calculated something that made no sense to him. The drill had sunk into the granite at roughly 1/10 of an inch with every single revolution. Sit with that number, 1/10 of an inch per turn, into solid granite. Modern diamond-tipped drills, spinning at high speed with industrial pressure and water cooling, advance into granite far more slowly than that. Petrie was looking at a piece of Bronze Age waste rock that appeared to have been cut faster than a modern machine shop could manage. He wrote it down in plain language. Of the material and method of making the tools, he said, "Nothing is known." The father of Egyptology examined the evidence with his own instruments and admitted that the tool that made it was a mystery. And that mystery has a name now. We have the cores, we have the drill holes, we have the saw slots. In all the years since, no one has ever found the drills or the saws themselves. The bits are simply gone. And Petrie noticed how the great granite coffers had been hollowed out, which is stranger still, not scooped with chisels. Drilled. Rows of tubular holes bored side by side around the inside of the box, the thin walls between them, then broken away, the surface cleaned up afterward. He could still see the traces. Inside the coffer, deep in the Great Pyramid, 2 of those drill holes run too far, overshot, the tool having bitten deeper than the worker intended, and left the evidence of the slip frozen in the granite. Think about what that means. Somewhere in that chamber, 45 centuries ago, a drilling rig punched into stone hard enough to blunt steel, and a workman leaned on it a fraction too long. The mistake is still there. The machine that made it is not. If a mystery this large, sitting inside the most studied monuments on Earth, unsettles you the way it unsettles me, take 1 second right now to subscribe, because what these tools were capable of only gets stranger from here. Now, the mainstream did not just throw up its hands. There is a serious, sober explanation for the cutting, and you deserve to hear it in full before we go further. The leading answer came from another giant of Egyptology, a chemist named Alfred Lucas. And it goes like this. The Egyptians did not need a metal harder than granite. They needed something harder than granite between the metal and the stone. That something was sand. Ordinary quartz sand, which is just as hard as the quartz inside the granite. The idea is that a copper saw or a hollow copper tube was not doing the cutting at all. It was simply a carrier dragging or spinning loose quartz sand against the stone, and the sand ground the granite away grain by grain. The soft copper wears down too, but as long as you keep feeding fresh sand and applying pressure, the abrasive does the work. It is not a blade. It is a lubricated grinding machine powered by human muscle. And this is not just a theory on paper. In the late 1990s, an experimental archaeologist named Denys Stocks decided to test it for real. And he did it the honest way. He went to Aswan, to the same quarries, and he tried to cut the same granite with reconstructed copper tools and quartz sand. He built a copper saw a little under 2 meters long, 15 centimeters deep, 6 millimeters thick. He weighted it, fed sand under the blade, and had workers saw. And it cut. Slowly, but it cut. In one test, a crew ground a slot 3 centimeters deep and about a meter long in 14 hours of continuous work. He tried the tubular drill too, packing dry sand into a spinning copper tube. And after 20 hours of drilling, he pulled out a granite core about 6 centimeters long. He had done it. He had cut granite with copper and sand, exactly as Lucas predicted. So that settles it, doesn't it? Here is where it gets strange again. Look closely at what Stocks actually recorded, because the numbers are the whole story. His drilling rate through granite came out to about 5.2 cubic centimeters of stone per hour. His saw ground its way down at a crawl, and in the process, the copper blade itself wore away by 7.5 millimeters. The tool was being consumed almost as fast as the stone. He proved the method was possible. He also, without meaning to, proved how staggeringly slow and hungry it was. Now take that rate and multiply it by reality. The king's chamber and its granite coffer, the temple blocks, the colossal statues, the obelisks, hundreds upon hundreds of tons of granite, cut, drilled, hollowed, and polished to flat surfaces accurate to fractions of a millimeter. At 5 cc's an hour, with tools that dissolve as you use them, the arithmetic stretches into a span of labor that strains belief. The method works in a single test. It does not obviously scale to a civilization's worth of hard stone monuments. That is the gap the tidy story keeps falling into. And there is one more thing the experiments never quite reproduced. Petrie's 1/10 of an inch per turn. The regular, deep, evenly spaced grooves cut at the same depth whether the drill was passing through soft feldspar or hard quartz, as if the cutting point never cared how hard the rock in front of it was. That evenness is the fingerprint that has haunted this debate for 140 years. Loose sand cuts unevenly, wandering with the grain. Something in these cores looks fixed, controlled, fed. Which brings us to the third clue, and the biggest one. It is not an object. It is an absence. We have found the waste. We have found the cores drilled out of granite, the failed coffers, the trenches, the saw slots, the fields of dolerite balls. We have the entire debris trail of an industrial operation that shaped mountains. And in all of it, across every quarry, every temple, every tomb, we have never found a single one of the actual cutting tools. No saw capable of slicing basalt. No drill bit capable of boring granite. Not broken, not worn out, not buried, not thrown away. The Egyptians left us their trash and kept their machines. Or the machines were made of something that did not survive. Or they were so valuable they were melted down and reused to the last gram. Whatever the reason, the result is the same. We are staring at the finished work of a technology and holding none of the technology itself. Where are the tools? That is the question this entire investigation circles, and it has never once been answered. An engineer named Christopher Dunn spent years on exactly this problem, examining Petrie's cores and the precision of the granite work up close. He argued that the marks read like the output of machinery, that the upper reaches of this stone craft look less like hand labor and more like a lost industrial process. Mainstream Egyptology firmly rejects his conclusions, and we will come back to the fight over his claims. But notice what even his fiercest critics concede. They agree the tools have never been found. They agree the drill bits are missing. They agree with Petrie that the method of making the tools is unknown. The argument is only ever about what filled that gap. Everyone agrees the gap is real. And the strangest part is that the Egyptians clearly kept records. In 2013, a French team digging at an old harbor on the Red Sea coast at a site called Wadi al-Jarf uncovered the oldest inscribed papyrus ever found in Egypt. It is a logbook, a work diary, kept by an inspector named Merer during the reign of Khufu, the pharaoh of the Great Pyramid, around 45 centuries ago. And it is astonishing. Merer records his crew of about 200 men, day by day, hauling white limestone blocks from the quarries at Tura across to the Giza Plateau by boat, filling their vessels, riding the Nile, unloading at a great artificial harbor they called the Basin of Khufu. For the first time, we have a first-hand account written by a man who helped build the Great Pyramid. And here is the haunting thing about that document. It tells us how they moved the stone. It says nothing about how they cut it. The one surviving logbook from the greatest construction project of the ancient world is a shipping manifest. The cutting, the drilling, the shaping of granite harder than iron, the single most mysterious part of the whole operation, is simply not there. Either it was recorded on papyrus that rotted away, or it was knowledge held so closely it was never written at the level Merer worked. The people who split the mountains left us a delivery schedule and took the secret of the tools to the grave. Now, does any of this prove the wildest version of the story? That the Egyptians had electric drills, ultrasonic machines, some lost power technology handed down from a vanished civilization? Probably not. Let's be honest about that, because the truth here is stronger than the hype and deserves better treatment. The sober explanation has real weight. Denny's stocks genuinely did cut Aswan granite with nothing but copper, sand, and muscle. That is not a rumor. That is a documented experiment, repeated and filmed. Fire setting is real too. Heating the rock and shocking it with water until it cracks. And granite can begin to fracture at temperatures as low as a couple hundred degrees. Wooden wedges, hammered into cut slots and soaked with water, can split a block along a line. The dolerite pounders demonstrably shape granite. And that famous spiral on core number 7, the smoking gun of the machine argument, was examined more closely by later researchers, an acoustics engineer and a stonemason among them, who concluded the marks were not a single continuous helix at all, but a series of separate rings, the ordinary signature of a drill lifted and lowered by hand. Even Dunn, to his credit, acknowledged that reassessment of that particular core. Piece by piece, the individual miracles have plausible human explanations. So no, this is not proof of ancient electricity or lost supermachines. I am not going to insult you by pretending it is. But here is what the sober, skeptical, feet-on-the-ground view still cannot make ordinary. Strip away every wild theory, throw out every lost civilization, and you are left with a set of plain facts that are arguably stranger than the fantasy. A people with no iron and no steel took the hardest stone on earth and cut it, drilled it, sawed it, and polished it flat to a fraction of a millimeter, at a scale of hundreds of tons, using tools that grind themselves to nothing as they work, at a speed that experiments measure in cupfuls of dust per hour. They shaped a 1,000-ton needle out of a mountain and undercut it through a trench you could barely kneel in. They left the cores, the slots, the balls, and the waste. And they left not a single one of the machines. You do not need aliens to be unsettled by that. You just need to look at what is actually lying in the sand at Aswan. And if even the modest version of this is true, it means something uncomfortable about the story we tell ourselves. It means a society we file away as early, primitive, prehistoric, possessed a command of hard stone that we can only partly reconstruct even now with lasers and diamond blades and the entire toolkit of modern engineering. It means the plaques and the guidebooks are describing a method that works in a laboratory and stalls on a calendar. It means our picture of the ancient world is not a finished portrait. It is a sketch with the most important lines missing. And if we are missing something this large about the most famous monuments on the planet, monuments that millions of people visit and photograph every year, then what exactly do we understand about the ruins we have barely touched? Think about what the next generation of study is going to do to this question. High-resolution scanning is now being turned on the finest surviving Egyptian stone vessels, the thin-walled granite and diorite jars. And the early results describe a symmetry and precision that keeps forcing the same uncomfortable conversation back into the open. The better our instruments get, the fewer excuses the primitive tools story has left. We are not moving toward a simpler answer. We are moving toward a sharper version of the same impossible one. Here is the question that will not let go. If the people who did this truly had only copper, sand, and stone bowls, then where is the failure, the archive of broken drills that a project this size would leave behind by the ton? And if they had something more, something that left grooves a machine shop would respect, then where did it go so completely that 4,500 years of digging has never turned up a single blade of it? You do not lose an entire technology by accident. It either never existed the way we imagine, or someone made very sure it would not be found. Either answer rewrites the chapter. So, who split the mountains that became the pyramids? Not a myth, not a legend. Real crews of real people standing in a granite pit under the Aswan sun, hurling stones and dragging copper and feeding sand into slots, cutting a giant free from the bedrock until the day the stone cracked and they walked away. They left the marks, they left the pounders, they left the cores and the saw cuts and a logbook that talks only about boats. And they took the tools with them into silence. The unfinished obelisk is still there. It is still lying on its side in the quarry, still joined to the mountain along its base, the crack still running through it, the trench still cut around it. The marks of the machines still fresh in the granite, as if the workers stepped out for a moment and never came back. Nobody has ever raised it. Nobody has ever explained fully what shaped it. And whatever did the shaping is not in any museum, not in any collection, not in any drawer of artifacts on Earth. It is simply gone, the way the 1/10 of an inch per revolution is gone, the way the drills are gone, leaving only the wound in the stone and a question with no floor to it. The mountains were split, the pyramids were built, and the machines that made it possible have never been found.